Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear. Joining me today is this, let me see if I can point to it, lizard on the wall out there. Say hello to him. I haven't named him yet, but anywho, today I'm doing a follow-up video on how my week is going with the Chris Reeve Sebenza 21. I will say that this knife is nice. I haven't hated carrying this knife, far from it. I think it's a good knife. But I will say I'm not totally won over yet. So I'm going to give you kind of an update on some of the things I talked about in the first video and some of the things that made some people a little bit upset with me, and just go over, kind of where I'm at, what I've done with the knife so far, and keep you guys updated. And then on Wednesday, we'll be doing the final wrap up once it's been a full week. But today is Saturday, so it's day 4 with the knife in my pocket. And I feel like I've got enough kind of going so far through my head to at least do an update and let you guys know how it's going. So the first thing I said in my first video was that I thought it was overpriced, and I jumped immediately into that they use S35VN. Now, I said in that video specifically that I think some other steels are better. Let me say, some people got real mad because I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not. Definitely not trying to claim to be. There are people who know far more about steels than I do, but I do have access to some steel charts that are pretty widely published, and I've looked over those. I've read them. Some people got a little bit heated with me in some threads, just saying that I have no authority to say that any steel is better than another. You know what's worse than S35VN? 440C. You know what's worse than S35VN? 8CR13 MOV. I think those same people who are saying I can't say a steel is better would also say that S35VN is better than a lot of things. So this is my opinion. I think that certain steels are better, at least for my application, and even for what this knife was designed for. Now, S35VN is a very well-balanced steel. I was pretty upfront about saying that I like S35VN. I think that it's a great steel. I don't have gripes with S35VN, but I don't think it's a $400 knife steel, on a folder especially. I think other materials would make me feel like I'm getting more for my money. The steels that I specifically mentioned were 20CV, M390, and 204P. You might be saying those steels are virtually identical. They may have slightly different processes, so don't jump down my throat about that statement. The whole steel debate thing, I think, is interesting. Some people get real up in arms about it, but those 3 steels are very, very similar. They come from 3 different factories, and those steels, in my opinion, from what I see about the people being real competitive about material selection, seem to be kind of the new normal for what comes on a high-end production folder. There are some other weird dark horses out there, not even like that weird, but steels like M4, or steels like 4V. Those steels, in my opinion, I like better than S35VN. Not only do they have better edge retention, but some of them have better toughness. What they often don't have is ease of sharpening. To me, ease of sharpening isn't what I look for in a great steel for a folder. I don't want to have to sharpen my knives as frequently, even if they're harder to sharpen. If you're not that way, that is fine. More power to you. S35VN is a great steel. Not trying to throw shade at it, but I don't think at this point in the marketplace it is a steel that is worth top shelf premium dollars. Even on Blade HQ's website, when you look at their steel comparisons, they have great charts, all kinds of stuff. There are other places to do research. I'm not saying just count totally on Blade HQ. Whatever you want to look at is fine. But even in their listings of steels, S35VN is no longer listed in the top column. It's listed as premium and not high-end, or I don't know how they separate it, but there's a chunk of steels that are listed above it in terms of like super steels, and S35VN is a tier below. So even according to their charts, it's not at the top of the list anymore. That being said, I'm going to reiterate again, I like S35VN. I think it's a great steel. I have other knives in S35VN, and I like them. They do great. They have good edge retention. They have good toughness. They have pretty good ease of sharpening. There's a lot that's going for it. They're very corrosion resistant to an extent. It's just not my favorite, and I think there are other competitors offering what I would consider to be better steels. In my opinion, not a metallurgist, not a scientist in any kind of way. From my perception, steels that are better for less money. So that was the point I was trying to make, and I stand by that. I'm not going to, regardless of how many people try to yell and scream that, well, CRK does the best heat treat ever known to man. There are other people who also do good heat treats. There are other manufacturers who are nailing heat treats on 20CV or M4 or LMAX or all kinds of other steels. There's other manufacturers starting to use steels like Vanax. There's other manufacturers willing to use steels like 10V at this point. There are other production knives that are getting consistent heat treat results out of steels that I would consider to be higher class. So even though S35VN from Chris Reeve is great S35VN, it's very well heat treated, it's consistent, that's all fine and dandy. But they could be consistently great at heat treating a different steel, and I would prefer it. So that's all I'm going to say on that matter. That turned into a bit of a rant. But the other items on my list that I talked about, the snail trails, that's something that I don't think I'm going to change my mind on. This finish on the titanium is prone to getting snail trails. I think that's kind of almost a design choice from them. They could finish this titanium a totally different way if they wanted to. They could coat it. They do all kinds of things that could potentially make it less prone to getting snail trails. But I think that's kind of the character of the knife. And so there are other knives that have different design traits that I like or don't like, and I think that's fine. The next thing would be, I mentioned that there's no lock bar insert. This is another thing that just kind of fine to me. This is interesting. The pivot's actually a little bit loose right now, and I'm not sure how that happened. I just kind of hand tighten it down. It stayed on center, which is interesting. Anywho, there's no lock bar insert. I've read up more on that. It doesn't bother me on this knife. I feel like that's fine. The way that they finish the titanium so that it's protected against degrading over time seems to be consistent. There's a lot of people who use these knives enough and don't have lock bar failure. That's fine. I feel like they've engineered a good enough lock bar. In fact, they kind of did invent the Reeve integral lock. So fine there. That doesn't bother me. It's not something I'm going to hold against it. I also said that I don't particularly love the action, even though I respect the action. I will say I've played with this knife quite a bit. I fidget with my knives a lot, and so since this has been in my pocket a ton, I've pulled it out and I've fidgeted with it quite a bit. The action is what everyone says it is. If you like that kind of action, you like the hydraulic, smooth, kind of glassy, but very kind of like deliberate and like takes some pressure from your thumb to move the whole way along kind of action, then you're going to love this action. That's not the kind of action that I prefer. The more I've played with it, I haven't grown to like it more or less. I could take it or leave it. I think this knife is great for other reasons. Next, I would say the hype behind the knife was something that I talked a little bit about. I have found that there's a lot of people who, after my first video, either commented or DM'd me or whatever it may be, and they said that they thought a lot of my points were fair. Even if they were diehard Chris Reeve kind of fanboys who own a lot of the knife or have theirs and have had it for a long time and love it, who are looking forward to getting their first 31 that just came out, there's a lot of people who just adore this knife. And I'll say that the bulk of people who commented said that they thought at least my opinions were mostly fair. If there's one thing they'd want me to look at, it would be this, and I respect that. I think it's great that a lot of people took the time to say, this has been my experience with it. I thought this was a little unfair. Look into it more. That kind of thing is fine. But there was a very loud minority in a specific Facebook thread that I put up and on one of my Instagram posts and in one of my DMs where people were just vehemently mad about my comments about S35VN and just trying to be the internet police. One of them even said I shouldn't be posting any videos on YouTube where I'm saying other steels are better than S35VN because I'm ignorant and all this nonsense. So I will say that there is a small core of the fanboys who hype up Chris Reeve knives who are very annoying, but you could find that with any knife manufacturer or any hobby in general. I'm really into cars, have been for a long time. I used to do a lot of automotive photography and I worked in the car business, both in selling new cars and in aftermarket, and I love cars. And there are certain certain parts of the car community that are that way as well, where muscle car guys are going to have different opinions than import guys. And it's interesting as somebody in the knife scene who likes a pretty wide variety of things, to see the fanboys from any segment of it and how right they think they are about everything in that niche and how everything else is wrong. And so I will say that most of the people who are even really into the Chris Reeve knives, who I've spoken with as I've been doing this, and I have tried to have some real conversations with people who love this knife and pick their brains about why they like it so much. I will say that most of them have been very kind, very humble about it, and they're open about it being preference, that there are things that they like about this knife that aren't necessarily because it's the best way to do it, because it's instead because it's the way that they like it to be done. And I think that's an important distinction. Yeah, I don't, if anyone tries to tell me that this is the end all be all of knives and that nothing better can ever come except for the next Sebenza, which is slightly tweaked to be a little bit different, I just don't respect their opinion. I think there are other things that are interesting in the knife community that are very different from this and have strong arguments as to why they're actually effective cutting tools as well. So take that for what it is. The things that I will say I've learned about this knife from carrying it and using it. This is important. This is my actual experience with the knife so far. This grind is fantastic. I love the hollow grind on this knife. I think it cuts supremely well, goes through any material I've put it through so far, mostly cardboard, just opening packages and stuff. It glides through. It's a really great grind. I love how thin they've been able to get it behind the edge, but still have a substantial feel to it. This isn't like a wafery thin knife. That's great. I love the spine, how it's rounded. I love the jimping on this blade. I think they are just fantastic at doing jimping at Chris Reeve Knives. This jimping feels great. I like the way it carries in pocket. I lean towards preferring deep carry clips on knives, but it's not like a requirement for me. There are plenty of knives that I like just fine that don't carry deep. So I think it kind of depends on the nature of the knife and the type of knife it is. Anywho, this clip is fantastic. The way it sits in pocket is great. No complaints about carrying this knife. I think it goes in pocket fantastically well. It's easy to put in one-handed. It's easy to draw out one-handed. The way it carries, 10 out of 10. Just fantastic at carrying. I will say also, let's see. One of the things I pointed out in the first video that I wasn't so sure about was the way that this cutout is right here. Ergonomically feels a little interesting to me. I still don't love that. This knife ergonomically for me is fine. I'd call it good, but not great. The lines are so simple that most of the knife feels good in hand. But that spot, the way that my finger wraps around the knife, I don't love the way that I can feel that cutout. It's not a hot spot. It's not sharp. But the knife would feel so much better to me if that was less of a dramatic cutout. I'm sure some people love that. That's the way it works for my hands. But me personally, especially when I've like been testing this on cardboard and cutting through quite a bit, like that's the spot that I can feel the most. And it's just not like an ergonomic dream like some other knives are for my hand. I think that's about it for the actual use and carrying and cutting. One thing I put down in my notes that I will mention, is that a lot of people have said that a lot of the value that they perceive that comes from Chris Reeve knives on any of their knives, not just the Sebenza, is the warranty. And so I agree. I don't think I mentioned that in my first video, and I probably should have. I was already aware that they have a fantastic warranty, that they offer spa services. They'll essentially refurbish your knife for you. Replacement parts are fairly easy to come by and to get directly from them. And you can disassemble this knife, fail to put it back together, send them the pieces, they'll put it back together for you, all that kind of stuff. They have probably the best warranty that exists for a knife community right now. So I do think that definitely adds value, but I'm still a question mark as to whether this is a $450 knife because of that warranty. I think even though their warranty is absolutely phenomenal, probably the best, like I said, there are other knife companies who have pretty competitive warranty structures in place, and from all accounts that I've heard are fantastic to work with if something goes wrong with the knife. So even though they're absolutely at the forefront, it's not like they're the only ones doing that and everyone else will just tell you to go screw yourself if something goes wrong on your knife. I do think it's certainly something worth considering when purchasing a knife, especially one that's expensive, whether they're going to take care of you after the purchase or not. So it speaks volumes. But I have to mull that over some more, whether I think that's worth the price difference between this and some other comparably set up in material type of knives. And it is also made in the US. That's something to be said for it. When you compare this to overseas knives, that's where a lot of the like real good budget stuff comes in, I'll say that. So to see other US made titanium frame locks, using all US materials and parts and made here, the competition gets much narrower, but I still don't necessarily think that if I was given $450 to purchase a USA made titanium frame lock today, someone handed me that money, I don't know that I'd pick this over some of the other ones either. So we'll see. I've got a couple more days to have this in pocket, and to keep using it and carrying it, and we'll see if that changes any more. I would say I like this knife maybe 10% more than I did coming into it after using it and carrying it. I already had kind of felt it ergonomically, but I'd never cut anything with it. And with how good this blade does at cutting, I think it's certainly gained a little bit of steam for me. But if I were to right now say like, you can have this or you can have the money that it costs, I'd probably keep the money. So we'll see if these last couple of days change that. This was a lot of talking and not a lot of action of the knife, but there it is. That's the Sebenza. Thanks again to Sam who's letting me borrow this. I really do appreciate it, and it's been interesting for me so far. I think the most interesting part has been the response. I haven't learned anything groundbreaking from carrying the knife. Like I said, I do think I like it a little more now that I've cut with it and seen how the edge performs. But the most interesting thing has certainly been the comments and the replies, and the people who are so into this knife. It's interesting for me to try to kind of look through the window and see why. And yeah, I'm learning every day from interaction and from using it. So I'll keep you guys updated. You can look forward to on Wednesday, I will be posting the final thoughts on this. And yeah, we'll see where it takes us.